Local stories, local voices. We're localwebradio.fm.
The Semiahmoo Peninsula is an area rich in history. Join Gordie Hogg as we take a step back in today's past with candid and entertaining interviews. From the Big White Rock and train tracks along the promenade to the peaceful surroundings of Blackie Spit Park and Crescent Beach, learn the stories behind what grew us into the community we all call home.
Well, yes, this is your host, Erik Reynolds, and this is the Gordie Hogg Show, where we will be talking with Gordie about memories past and stories present in White Rock and on the Semiahmoo Peninsula. I'm here today with Gordie Hogg, a longtime resident on the peninsula, who also serves as our MLA, as well as special guest Tom Saunders, a lifelong resident of White Rock, author of a children's book, and a musician, amongst many other things. Today we're going to be talking about the 100th anniversary of the White Rock Pier and some of the history of White Rock. Now, before Gordie and Tom join us, just as a reminder that if you have questions, you can reach out to Gordie at his office at 604-542-3930 or on his website at www.gordonhoggmla.bc.ca. Well, Gordie, it's great to be talking with you again today.
Great to be back, Erik. Nice to see you and hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tom, I want to welcome you to the call.
Thank you.
Well, Gordie,
good to be here.
Yeah, it's just great to have you, Tom. I'm looking forward to the conversation. The audience knows Gordie. We've had a couple of conversations already, but they've never had a chance to meet Tom. So, Tom, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Well, I was born in a place called White Rock, BC.
A little place. Never heard of it before, huh?
No, actually in White Rock, in the old White Rock Hospital.
Oh, wow.
By Dr. Middleton. And, he delivered me. And went to White Rock Elementary and White Rock Junior and Semiahmoo High. And here we are.
And you've got brothers and sisters that were all over the place, Tom. Tell us about them.
They're still here. They're all in. Actually, except for one brother. One brother is moved all the way to Langley, BC.
Oh, wow.
But the rest of us are all in right in White Rock.
So,
and I'm the only one who actually was born in White Rock, so...
You're the lucky one then, huh?
I've got the pure pedigree here.
There we go. Well, you seems like you know a lot of the history. I mean, just if nothing else, you lived it. But let's go ahead and talk about that, guys. How did White Rock get its name? Tom or Gordie, how did White Rock get its name?
Well, it was a large rock that apparently was left out of the glacial shield when it melted away and it's stuck on the beach, and mariners used it as a beacon, a point to sea for their navigation. And years later, it became painted white, but it was quite bright in any event. But some of the mariners painted it as to make it easier for their navigation purposes. And Tom, you can tell the other side of the story.
Which side is that, Gord?
I think you could talk about how the rock landed there, maybe not through the glacial phase, but it maybe came from...
Yes, there's the native legend of the White Rock was that many miles away over on Vancouver Island, a town called Sydney, there was a sea god there, and he had a young strapping son, and he was swimming around. He came up on the beach and saw this Cowichan princess bathing on the beach. And he came over and started talking. They hit it off. He said, "Do you bathe here often?" And she fell madly for this son of a sea god, and they decided that they wanted to get married. So they went to her father. And he said, "You can't marry this guy. He's immortal. He's a sea god." And they went to his father, the sea god, and said, "We want to get married." And he said, "No, she's a mortal, and it's just not going to happen." So she said, "Do you have any more bright ideas?" And he said, "Yes. we'll go over on the beach, see that big white rock? I'm going to pick it up and throw it as far as I can. Wherever it lands, that's where we're going to make our home. So he picked it up and he threw it, and it landed on the beach in White Rock. She grabbed onto the back of his neck, and he started swimming, and they landed there, and that's where the Semiahmoo people emerged, and that's how it happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's two stories, and people can choose to believe one or both, but one's much more romantic and positive with the history of our community.
Yeah, I could absolutely see a movie almost coming out of the story that Tom just told.
Yeah,
it's very similar to another story that Gordo was told about the kingdom of Spotsylvania, where there was King Spud and Queen Spud and their lovely daughter Princess Spud. Gordon, can you carry that story on?
Oh, why are you setting me up for this? So Princess Spud fell madly in love with, it was a few years ago, and it was Walter Cronkite, the famous broadcaster that he fell in love with, or she fell in love with. So she came home to her mother and father, Queen and King Spud, and said, "Mom, Dad, I'm madly in love with Walter Cronkite, and I dearly want to marry him." And King Spud said, "I'm sorry, my little princess, my little dear, but you cannot marry Walter Cronkite." And Princess Spud was distraught and distressed and dismayed and said, "But why, Dad? Why can't I marry Walter Cronkite?" And King Spud said, "Because he's just a commentator."
But
Okay, you shouldn't set me up for that one, Tom.
Tom, you set all of us up for that one.
I
was bad, Tom.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's
my.
parallels between the White Rock story and that. So.
Well, somewhere in between the three stories lies the truth, I'm sure. But So we're coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the pier, if I understand correctly, right?
In about a month and a bit, yes.
Wow, and it's such a beautiful pier. I know if you looking at the website of the city, or if you look up any history, it's called our City by the Sea, and it's just a wonderful and lovely place. Can you guys take us maybe for a historical walk along the shore there? Just share some stories and history about the pier.
Well,
you go ahead. You start way back 100 years ago, Tom.
Okay, well, 100 years ago, right before they had a pier, there's a whole lot of people that lived here that wanted to get some sort of a more permanent landing. There was a really rickety pier over by the rock that sort of rose and sank as the tide did, and the story is that they kind of they used a little bit of cunning in that they got the federal minister of fisheries and oceans in 1913 to come out to White Rock to see what the problem was, and they timed it so that he landed at high tide, and he had to make his way along this very rickety and dangerous pier. And by the time he made it into shore, he agreed that we needed a good-sized pier, and
there was legislation at that time, wasn't there, Tom? That federal legislation that said that the first entry into Canada, because we're right on the Canada-U.S. border, but the first entry required to have a landing place for people, for ships that were coming in. So they were required to have it, and as Tom pointed out, the one we had at that point wasn't good enough.
And
so, Tom,
one that we got now. The one that we got now is a beautiful pier. I believe it could be one of the longest piers in Canada.
Really?
Can you confirm that, Gord?
I have heard that, but I cannot confirm it. I've heard people say that it is the longest pier of that type of stanchion in Canada, but I'm not sure.
And I can't imagine there's that many places in BC where the tide goes out almost a mile in certain spots, so I would tend to believe that. And on the East Coast, I can't imagine the tide going out as far as it does here. I mean, they call Semiahmoo Bay one of the safest beaches in Canada because you can start walking out in it, and about the first 10 minutes you're up to your ankles. Another 10 more minutes, and you're up to your knees.
Wow!
It's a very safe, wonderful beach, and incredible. Sand too for building sand castles and
so when we were when we were growing up in White Rock, sorry there, Tom, we had there was a pier at the end of, or a tank at the end of the pier. It was 25 yards long, and all of us kids who grew up here took swimming lessons on the beach. Merle McGrath was the head of the White Rock Amateur Swim Association, and she had her little umbrella, and we'd take lessons and just go out into the water. And if we, after a couple of sessions or maybe a couple of summers, if we were good enough, we got to go out to the end of the pier and swim the tank. And if you could swim the tank, the 25 yards, then you were allowed to go out there and swim consistently, and you got a little badge for doing that.
Huh.
So that was, and people used to dive off the pier, but now there's a lot of sand there, so it's a little more difficult to do that. And also growing up, originally back in the times that Tom was talking about, there was the Veteran of Foreign Wars building that was about a third of the way out, or just over a third of the way out of the pier and on the east side, and it burnt down. Well, what year would that have been, Tom? Back in the 30s or 40s?
32, I think.
32?
Yeah.
And there was also, in closer to shore, there was the Dolphins restaurant. And
that was the second Canadian Legion building there.
Yeah, yes, that's right. When the Veteran of Foreign Wars burnt down, it was the Legion that they put up there. And then it became the Dolphins restaurant. And I can remember taking square dancing lessons there when we were in junior high from Mr. Brown, just to teach there. And then they had fish and chips on a place that you could have a takeout window. And it was, what would it have been, Tom? Maybe 20 yards out from the shore? Something like that?
About that, yeah. Yeah, very close. My favorite memory of the Dolphins, that building, is actually swimming underneath it. There was big square cement pilings, or pilings sat on these big square cement blocks under there, and you'd swim back and forth under them and looking up. I was never inside it, but I was underneath it for hours and hours every day during the summer down there swimming. And yeah, great place.
And I don't think they had a good sewage system in those days. That's probably not a good place for you to have been swimming, Tom.
Huh. Really?
Well,
really?
Well, Tom, Gordie, real quick, let's go ahead and take a real quick break here, a quick commercial break. And we'll talk a little more about the pier and maybe some of the other things going on around there as soon as we get back. But my name is Erik Reynolds, and we're here today with Gordie Hogg and Tom Saunders. Like I said, we're after the break. We'll talk about the anniversary of the White Rock Pier. We'll be right back.
More with Gordie Hogg after a word from our sponsors.
Shopping for the lowest mortgage rate? Looking to refinance?
Catch the Mortgage Newscast with Jared Dreyer
On the Business Channel.
on localwebradio.fm.
If you're struggling with a dental or oral health issue, be sure to catch the Healthy Smiles Oral Health Show with Dr. Norm Ickard on the Health Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Buying or selling a home on the Semiahmoo Peninsula? Catch up on local market conditions on This Week in Real Estate with Lance and Connie Marples from Sutton West Coast Realty on localwebradio.fm.
Now back to the Gordie Hogg Show.
All right, we're back with Gordie Hogg and Tom Saunders. Now, guys, I understand that 2014, of course, we talked about it before, marks the 100th anniversary of the historical White Rock Pier. And the pier, very scenic walkway, but we talked about it a little already, but can you share a little bit more about what else was there in the past, compared to, may say, what's there today?
There was the boat rentals down at the end there. Gord, you remember that.
The old putt-putt boats, we call them.
The putt-putts and the kayaks. Yeah, the dinghies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, the tank. And now, we call it a tank. Any idea why we call it a tank? It was really 4 floats interconnected to make a rectangle. So, I mean, it was kind of the shape of the swimming pool, but I don't understand why they called it a tank. Any idea, Gord?
No, I don't know why they called it that either. But I also remember that we had when water skiing became popular, there was the ski jump out there, and there were lots of people that would jump over the ski jump and then ski right underneath the pier. I can remember skiing under the pier myself a few times. We thought we were pretty bold and brave when we were able to do that.
And
then sort of Tom, remember, was it that the federal government decided they didn't need the pier any longer? And so in the 1970s, there was talk of it being torn down. And there was a response from the community, a large response from the community, expressing their concern, and eventually the city took it over. And the federal government provided some funding to allow a number of the planks to be replaced and redone. In fact, I remember Donald Barnett, the famous snowball, who was a legend in our community. He worked on the rebuilding of it, and I remember him showing me a picture of in the museum that they had of him doing work on it. He was very proud of himself, and so he should have been for helping rebuild the pier there.
So it went from being federal responsibility to the city took it over then?
That's right. The city took it over in the probably about 1976, 75 or 76. And I know the museum used pieces of the old planks that was made up of, and they cut them to little pieces and had them done and sold those as fundraisers for it.
Do you remember before the city took it over, the pier used to be painted red? All the handrails. Is that familiar at all? That is because all federal piers in Canada are painted red.
I didn't know that.
Well,
and I'm colorblind anyway, so it wasn't a big issue for me.
Yes, Gord, all federal piers in Canada are painted gray.
He's trying to trick me, Eric.
Yeah.
So, and I think tying into the pier, maybe we can in a minute maybe talk about some of the celebrations that are planned for the 100th anniversary. But when the Canada or Vancouver hosted Expo in 1986 Expo, there was the federal government had some plans. I was the mayor of White Rock at the time, and had this vision that we could have a promenade next to the train tracks. Of course, growing up, Tom and I and people would have crawled underneath the trains when they stopped in White Rock and back and forth, things that we would never propose to do now or want anyone to do. But there was a federal program that allowed us to get some funding. So I proposed that we build a promenade from the pier to the west. And we put the parking lots in because when I was growing up, all the parking lots south of Marine Drive were all just gravel. And you could actually drive your car right up onto the tracks. And some people drove their car right out onto the beach on occasion, and I can remember cars being stuck out there and the tide coming in and covering them up. So we were able to get, at the end of Expo, I was able to get a number of the benches from Expo 86. So those are all along the waterfront now.
They're still down there, yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah.
The benches up from Expo 86. And there were a number of other things we looked at doing, but just didn't have the financial wherewithal to do that. And then a number of years later, we built the promenade into East Beach, and we were able to do that on the south side of the tracks, which is a little more convenient and a little more friendly for walking along there. So it's a big celebration, the 100th coming up. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about the celebration and what plans they've got for that?
I wish I could say that I knew what all the celebrations were, other than there's a big party on the pier in late August.
I think that's the major one, yeah.
Yeah, that's the major one. They're going to sort of have the end 2/3 of it set up and a big wing-ding party out there.
Wow.
Got your ticket, Gord?
I don't have my ticket yet, no, but I will certainly get it. And then they're going to have I think a wine and beer sales on there. They're going to have a number of food places, a number of people that are going to be dressed up, I think, in period costumes. So it'll be quite a celebration, I'm sure.
Hey, you guys, I've done a little research, and I've come to find out that not only are you guys having a great celebration coming up, but that Tom actually is a very gifted musician and actually has a song it's called the White Rock song, if I remember right.
That's right.
Is there any way we could twist your arm today and get you to play that for us? Would you happen to be able to do that for us today?
I believe I could. This was written and recorded in 1955 by a fellow named George Crow, who lived down on Marine Drive in White Rock. Mm-hmm. And George was an older fella at the time, so the song has very much sort of its doesn't sound like Chuck Berry and Elvis in the 50s. It's really sort of an old, sort of a Tin Pan Alley thing. And it goes something like this. When you feel like a seaside rendezvous, when you take an ocean for an ocean view, pack your grip and take a trip where smart ones flock. White Rock, BC. Far from the bustle of a city street, you can rest your muscles and your weary feet. Sniff the breeze, recline at ease, forget the clock. White Rock, BC. If you wish, you can fish, maybe steam a dish of clams that you can dig in the sand. There's a chance of romance when you're dancing to the band. I'm gonna tell you, White Rock's the place to lay your cares aside. Wash away your troubles in the swelling tide. Rest and fun, clean air and sun make people talk. White Rock, BC. White Rock, BC. Come on, Gord. White Rock, BC. And you, Eric. White Rock,
White Rock.
BC.
That is amazing. Oh my gosh, I love it. How
Good job.
wonderful is that?
So about the time
That was number one in White Rock for about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
it's still number one, I think.
I bet it has to be number one. I'm sitting here thinking, it's like, goodness, man, all these local pop stars or these current pop stars, they probably should take some lessons listening to some real music and some great music. That was amazing.
Speaking of pop stars from the 50s, did you know Elvis came to White Rock?
Really?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Well, came through White Rock on the train, and the story was people started getting a little too close to the train, so one of the porters had like a handful of nickels and threw them out to get everybody away from the train. And there's various stories of women that said that Elvis sort of looked at them and gave them a big wink and a smile, and they've never forgot it.
I bet he did. I bet he did. Actually, it's a little funny you mentioned that. The town I grew up in as a child was actually a military town down in the United States, and that's where Elvis was actually stationed when he had to join the military. I don't know if you know the story, but he was drafted, had to go into the military down in Texas, and actually where we lived was just about maybe half a mile down the street and around the corner from Elvis's very special military barracks.
That was Fort
Hood.
Fort Hood.
Yes, Fort Hood, Texas. Yes, it was. Yep.
And Eric, are you anywhere near White Rock, Texas?
I am not anywhere near White Rock, Texas, no.
When you Google White Rock...
Did you know there was a White Rock there?
I did not. Texas is pretty stinking large. There's a lot of it that you could live with your whole life, have no idea of all you're missing.
Well, BC too.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, hey, so Tom specifically, since we just this is our first episode with you, it's been such a great conversation. Before we go today, did you have anything else you'd like to share? Any final thoughts about living in White Rock?
No, I don't know whether everybody thinks that wherever they grew up was the best place on earth, but I think we certainly did. Because I mean, you couldn't beat it as a kid to have the beach down in front there, and still a little bit wild. There was still bush to go around and make your Tarzan swings and build forts, and I do not ever remember being bored as a child. That's probably one of the greatest things. There was always something to do. I mean, and you'd get up in the morning, like especially during the summer, you'd have something quick to eat for breakfast, you're down to the beach. Come back for lunch, go back down to the beach. Come back for supper, go back down to the beach till it gets dark, and then you were exhausted and started the whole thing over. It was a great place to grow up. That's amazing.
That is amazing. And so I really appreciate the conversation and the information about the history of not just of White Rock, but of course with the 100th anniversary of the pier. It's been great talking to you both and learning some of that history today. And for listeners, real quick before we go, as a reminder, if you need to reach out to Gordie, you can do so on his website. And that website, one more time, is www.gordonhoagmla.bc.ca, or you can call his office, pick up the phone, give him a call at 604-542-3930. Now, Gordie, Tom, for myself, for the listeners, it's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Erik.
Thanks very much, Erik. It's been a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you have an interesting story about growing up on the peninsula, please share it with us on our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/LWR Peninsula.
Local stories, local voices. We're localwebradio.fm.
This episode is a production of Jam Media. For information on hosting your own web radio show, visit jammedia.com. That's www.jambmedia.com.
The opinions expressed by our guest and host on localwebradio.fm do not necessarily reflect the views of Jam Media or its owners. No expressed or implied opinions of any product or service should be considered an endorsement or recommendation of any kind by Jam Media or its owners.